Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the.
Welcome to the inaugural episode.
See, you messed up the word. I just said the wrong word. Who's the positive here?
I'm in the positive. I knew what the hell I was talking about.
Welcome to the
In the positive. Welcome to the webcat.
Welcome to the Webcomic Podcast. No, wait. Fuck, it's not that either.
Webcomic Book Club. Welcome to the Webcomic Book Club.
Well, Webcomic Bookclub Podcast. Webcomic Book Club Podcast.
Good luck saying that 10 times straight.
I can't even say it's like 10 times flubbing.
Yeah. Okay, so, anyway.
I'm Zay.
I'm Mech.
We may get a third person in the future.
No. Or guests. We might have guests.
Yeah, that's what I meant.
Yeah. And basically, this is just like something we're trying out. Podcast, talk about different webcomics that we enjoy.
Yeah, since we both read quite a few of them.
I think I read like 5.
You seem like you read a lot more. And you talk about them quite a bit. You talk about the stuff, people that you're following, things like that.
6. I read 6.
Wow. Well, in my heyday, I read about 70. Kept updated.
Jesus.
It was my weekends.
Jesus.
So, basically, I read and have read a lot of different comics and a lot of different stories. Inspired by a lot of them, learned from a lot of them, things like that.
Yeah.
And so, I kind of brought this idea up to Mech, and he has a tough time saying no to me.
It's true.
I'll let you guys think about that one. So, the first episode, I kind of picked this one. We're going to be doing random ones in the future, but I made sure that we went with a very specific comic for the very first one, because this was the webcomic that kind of got me started in the furry fandom as a whole.
Really?
Yeah, this is the first, like, when I first met somebody who was, like, very prominently furry. And by the way, this is not going to be, like, a furry podcast in any way, shape, or form. This is just the comics that we follow. So,
yeah,
lots of different variety here.
As a matter of fact, we're going to be at the end here randomizing to see what the next comic is going to be, and the 2 I'm putting in are both non-furry.
Okay, well, anyways, but after I had initially talked to this person, kind of like was curious about various things in the fandom, and they were well known for putting up like webcomic snippets on their stuff. So I was like, what's this comic? What are a couple of you can recommend to me? And so this is the first one that was recommended to me, the very first one I read through, and it turned out that when I had like started reading it, it was nearly done. So I basically read the entire archives, and then the next upload, once I'd fully caught up, was the final comic.
Huh.
So, to start us off, after 3 minutes in, is Concessions.
Concession.
I have Concessions on my notes. So, Concession. My notes are immediately wrong. So I took notes. Notes on this.
So, basically how this is going to work. We only have to read the first 300 pages.
Or a part that we mark if we notice that there's chapters or something like that.
Yeah. So, basically, he went through and reread it. I read the first 300 pages. And it's just going to be a discussion.
Yeah, so let's start this off. What did you think of it?
I didn't quite care for it.
Yeah?
It seemed like it didn't quite have a set direction. It seemed like it turned around on itself a lot. And it seemed like the characters weren't super defined.
Alright. No, that's totally fair. From what I can tell of the comic, it started off very much like, let's have fun, let's make this thing. And then ended up turning into something more serious.
I could definitely see that. It almost seemed like it was the author of it was trying to figure out how to write a story. And this was his experiment. Or their experiment.
His. And for those of you who are curious, you can find the comic if you want to like just pause and catch up for some reason. That'll take you a little bit. But you can find the comic on, I have the note here.
Concessioncomic.com.
I can't even find my note on what the webcomic's name is, so I know you have it pulled up, but I just want to have it here. But
we're nothing if not professional.
It's our first thing. They can deal with it. But the person's also pretty active on Twitter at Immelman42, IMMELMANN 42, if anybody wants to follow them there, or Immelman.net, same spelling without the 42.net. So, they're an artist. They're very active around the community and stuff.
Yeah.
And they actually are working on another comic. They almost seem, I think, a couple of months after they finished up this one, they started their second one, or next one. They actually made quite a few comics in the duration of Concession running. But it's Order of the Black Dog, orderoftheblackdog.com. It's a horror sci-fi one. Towards the end of this comic, it becomes very apparent that that's what they love to do. You only got to the comic 300 that you kind of stopped.
300 out of 375.
Yep, I read through the 375, and holy crap, the amount of story that they just wrap up at the very end is insane. So let's give a basic synopsis of the comic before we get too heavily into anything. It basically starts off as almost like a slice of life comic.
Slice of life, friends working in a movie theater. They eventually, very soon, very quickly, they give an extra update each week. Each week, they're done with it now, of one of the characters' college life. And
yeah, it very much seemed like it was going to be a slice of life at first, and it was going to stay slice of life. But then, one of the main characters comes down with cancer. Artie comes down with cancer.
Yeah, which, still slice of life.
Still slice of life. But then, supernatural stuff starts going down, and weird horror stuff.
Supernatural action drama, almost.
I almost want to call it a soap opera or something. A lot of these really dramatic, over-the-top things ends up happening. They blame, accuse each other of stuff. They cheat on each other. They, change relationships. They change genders at some point. Some of them just outright change genders.
And I know none of this because I couldn't keep up with which character was which for the first half of the comic.
Yeah, and that's actually an interesting fault of it, because almost every single character was its own species.
Yeah.
And yet, for some reason, it was tough keeping names to characters.
Oddly enough, I could keep Rick and Kate, the two lemurs, even though they looked the most alike, even before Rick got fat. But I had it was just his art style was very, very much, each species looks very similar. And it would be basically a matter of, alright, which character is which color? And when you've got multiple green characters, multiple white characters, multiple black characters, furries, by the way,
racist!
it just gets confusing.
Wait, multiple black characters. There was Joel,
Nicole, who was it a guy or a girl?
That was a guy.
Okay, it was a guy the whole time?
Guy the whole time.
Even when it was breasts?
Yes.
Okay.
There was cross-dressing there.
Okay.
Stuffing, they bought bras and they stuffed the bras. Oh, this comic is absolutely,
PG-13 at the very least.
Yeah, there's a lot of blood, lots of gore, sex scenes.
I actually noticed, once it started to get a little bit supernatural, it seemed to take a lot of cues from Jack. Another webcomic.
They made Jack jokes and Jack references.
They did.
Constantly, and I loved that.
But
because I found Jack much later, and then I saw references made into it.
See, for me, it seemed like they were trying to go with the same kind of dark humor that Jack did, and the same kind of dark tone. But it seemed like they weren't devoted enough to actually play it off as this is genuinely a dark thing, and they tried to make jokes out of it a little too often.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know, I keep on thinking that the comic couldn't quite get its tone right throughout.
Yeah.
And it suffered, and it hiccuped from that a lot. Whenever it seemed like it was swinging into a certain tone, something would happen and jolt it out of that, and it would start going another direction for a bit, and then it would go back in. It was
basically every 15 pages I found something that I just laughed at.
Yeah.
That's the description I can give for its sense of humor.
And
of course, just personal.
No, and that's totally fair to say. I mean, if a comic wants to go one way, it can go one way, but this one seemed like it wanted to do a lot of different things.
Yeah, like I said, it seemed like the author was just trying to find a good way to tell a story.
What I find most interesting about this is it almost makes for the perfect first comic. It sounds like their first comic that they made, their first real attempt at making a webcomic. And I told you to read the descriptions, in the news posts underneath all of them.
I actually did that for probably 120 some odd comics, and then just kind of got bored with them.
Well, for one, they rant about music a lot down there, metal music. They're constantly talking about metal music.
care about.
Yeah, I mean, I completely ignored any like ranting or talk about metal music after about Comic 100. Look, I was dedicated to the whole thing.
I understand.
But they actually like talk a lot about things that were happening at the time. Now, this comic came out, it started at least, July 1st, 2006. It ended in February 11th, 2011. So it ran for nearly 6 years. But what's funny is that when it started, there were very, very few furry webcomics out there. In fact, there were so few that this comic was almost guaranteed to become really popular. Oh. And I remember the, like I told you to read the description posts on these. They would talk about how like they're putting up a forum, they're putting up like all these like chat boxes and all these sites you can talk to them through and like start this community through. And by about page 150, and the art style was nowhere near developed, there's no story at page 150, it sounded like as though they had a community. They had a group of people who were really dedicated to their comic, that were making fan art and doing all these things. Yeah. Hell, if you pull up the fan art page, you'll find a lot of stuff there from like the early days of it. Like, I just think there weren't a whole lot of other comics out at the time. In fact, it was so like bare bones at the time that one of the comics, and I can pull up the comic specifically so we can have a date, but they talked about how there were all these other furry comics coming out, and they talked about all the other furry comics that like were just starting almost at the same time each. And it was like a bigger deal, and they listed like 5. And now you can throw a stick and hit 5 furry comics. Like, people really do just start them from nothing.
Yeah.
With the hopes that they become really popular. And it's not to like bash on anyone or anything.
No, I mean, if you want to start a comic, it's absolutely a good idea to try. I mean,
and it was just a totally different environment.
Yeah.
And that's why I think this was a great one to read and start with.
It almost excuses like all the problems that the comic has, because there wasn't really much of a precedent. Like, there was nothing there was nothing within reach that the author could look at and say, that's a good way to do this.
Well, there was. Wow. The issue is that they were a lot fewer and far between, and I mean, you can make your own tone at all. I mean, hell, Jack was out.
That's true.
They were making references to Jack.
They very obviously take a lot of cues from it.
Jack was out. Free Fall was out. Two Kinds would have been out for quite a while at that point. What?
I didn't realize Two Kinds was that old.
It just celebrated its 12-year anniversary.
That's a good point.
Yeah, no, Two Kinds would have been out for quite some time. I mean, the ones that are really, really long-standing obviously would have been out at the time, but for the most part, it just doesn't... It feels as though this thing came out in a much, like, smaller fan base. I mean, there's probably a lot more comics out at the time. I can't go back to 2006 and make notes and make comparisons. I mean, fuck, I found the comic in 2011, so I can't make comparisons at the time.
I suppose.
So it's actually kind of a damn shame you didn't go through and read the last, like, 75 pages or whatever. Because I'm not kidding you when it became a whirlwind of explanations and just like, this is the story, guys. It's almost as though you could read the last 74 comics and then read the first 300 and it makes a lot more sense. Like, you literally stopped at like the worst time you possibly could have stopped. And I know like the rules for this is like, you only have to read 300 and that's fine.
And I think it's actually a good idea to have that perspective, just because for me, it's like, this webcomic is still something that's just confusing, like a cursory glance, basically. I did actually a bit more in depth than a cursory glance, and through, the webcomic was just kind of confusing and iffy and didn't seem to know where it was going.
But yeah, I'm trying to remember like at what point things happened, but long story short, just for like just letting you guys know what happens here. Joel, who is like kind of the main character through and through, it kind of focuses on Joel and Matt for the most part. And Matt being
Joel, Matt, Artie, and the dolphin.
I forget her name. She shows up like randomly, and then she gets like a reason later. It seems like
she shows up, she gets pregnant, she gets killed off, and she continues to show up.
Yep. But the basic premise that this comic works on is that there's like a spiritual connection between everything that's alive.
It's basically a spiritual plane of existence that. And some people belong to.
Yeah, and some people can interact with, and some people are like trapped in, almost like ghosts or demons. And Joel lost his twin sister when she was like just when they're both
tiny little
too young. Yeah, and they're both really young. And his sister ends up going onto this plane, and she fed on like sadness and fear and like destruction and stuff like that.
I think it was explained as like she watched her twin brother be driven insane.
I told you there's a lot explained in the last 74 pages. There's literally a scene where Joel is talking about how he like was not a slave to her in any way, shape, or form. She was not a slave to him. They were actually just working together because they both just wanted power.
I kind of got that cue from, I believe it was a dream sequence. Gonna try and avoid spoilers here.
Dude, who gives a shit? It's supposed to be like a book club. If you guys don't want spoilers, go back and read it. It's been around since 2006, okay?
But if I'm not mistaken, Artie's cancer gets worse, and Joel tries to go in and kill him, and Artie like discovers he has these powers and uses them to stop Joel, but ends up like pulling a female-looking Joel out of Joel's body. So, which I assumed was like, oh, he had a twin at some point. Like, at this point, it wasn't explained that he had a twin.
Yep, that's exactly what happened. That was his twin. But the thing is that Joel only wanted revenge. Yeah. Because his brother was the one who killed her. Mm-hmm. And then stole like their father's company when their father died, which was this giant medical company. Yeah. And then like didn't give it to his mother, who was like the rightful person to have it. And then he just like kind of got off scot-free with all this bad shit that had happened, and like never talked to him, never like broke up all connection with them, everything. Yeah. And then the last 74 comic pages come in, and basically the dude is totally inept. Like the brother like has no spiritual connection whatsoever. In fact, gets completely taken over by Artie. And Artie convinces him that Artie owns the company to start a fight with Joel.
Wait a minute here. So all that time that Joel was like subtly like trying to ruin his brother's company, he kills random people, causes pedophilia, and
oh yeah, there's child fucking in this comic too, by the way.
There's no explicit child fucking. There's just implied.
Heavily implied.
Yeah.
They have a NAMBLA convention.
I don't know what that is.
It's like National Association of Man-Boy Love or something.
Oh, that's not good. But anyway, like he goes through all this like random subtle shit to ruin his brother's company. It doesn't seem to have anything to do with it. And he like explains it as, my brother will notice if I just do things outright. His brother wouldn't have noticed at all, would he?
Never would have. Like,
son of a bitch. That like defeats the purpose of half the comic.
Not only that, so the entire purpose of him like killing all these people was to make like this psychic machine to focus all the psychic like death and torment into one spot, so he can fight his brother and like kill him and take the company, or take over him and convince him to give him the company back. And so like final few pages, he goes up to the top of this like giant tower that his brother's at the top of. He gets there, he like this whole machine triggers, and like hundreds of people die around the entire city in specific locations. And then he like tries to start this fight with his brother, and like as he's talking to him, his brother's like, no, I already sold the company. It's like, you what? And then Artie comes out of the fucking bathroom. He's like, oh, so we're not going to get lunch then? And he sold the company to Artie, who had been working with him at the concession stand and got cancer and like had this psychic connection hidden in him, yada, yada, yada. And
the dolphin is Artie's like version psychic of Joel's twin.
Yes.
She's his psychic connection.
Yes. Or like psychic demon specifically. He has a connection.
Psychic.
Yeah. Dolphins are psychic in this apparently. And they worship Poseidon, as that one joke made, which wasn't actually a joke. It's like
Wasn't it a joke?
It was not a joke. The like one dolphin girl immediately bopped her sister on the head. It's like, we don't stop telling people that. We practice a form of animism or something like that. Yeah. There's also a lot of religion in here, which
sort of.
Every single character had a religion.
Every single character had a religion, but none of it mattered.
Except priest
Joel being atheist, Matt being Catholic, and the priest didn't matter. Yeah, he was introduced, and within like 25 pages was killed.
Oh, but yeah, no, I actually wasn't done about this like final boss fight, quote unquote. So after like Artie comes out of the bathroom he has in there, he ends up explaining that, like, yeah, no, I knew what you're doing all the time, Joel. Like, you're really lazy at this. And he's like, he talked about how it's like, I put someone on the train who knows how to drive a fucking train to, like, stop that. I made sure somebody got to this person's home before, like, they end up committing before you made them commit suicide. And really, like, a car crash, Joel, a fucking fruit stand could stop that one. Like, and he explained all of these loose ends that Joel had made throughout all of this, like, years of planning, and how he, like, just stops the majority of it, but he still ends up starting this huge boss fight with Artie instead.
It's basically a case of slice of life. Turns out Joel's insane and like is like this mastermind villain, and then apparently in the last 75 pages it's revealed he's just a dumbass.
Not strictly a dumbass, just completely misled. Like, he has misled himself his entire life as to what was actually going on. I mean, even his brother tells him, it's like, what do you mean, like, Mom was supposed to get the company? She had no experience whatsoever, and I actually interned under him. The entire like, board of directors agreed I should lead it. It was like, it was immediately all explained away. It was almost as though, like, the first 300 pages didn't matter.
Deus Ex.
It was absolute. It may not have been Deus Ex. It was more so just like a complete turnaround. Like, a Deus Ex would have been like something would have prevented him or stopped him.
That's
and really,
a good point.
it really wasn't.
It was just a case of like negating the first part of the comic.
Yeah.
The first good part.
But then after all this is said and done, like, Joel's machine like starts this huge, like, basically wakes everyone up psychically across the entire place, so everyone's a bit nicer to each other.
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
Yeah, and then they, like, Joel and Matt become villains. Like, outright, it's explicitly said they become villains at the end, and like they go around and they like would drain people of psychic power, and then the priest and the little boy. No, priest wasn't died. The priest was not dead.
Killed.
Dude, the priest was not dead.
The priest hasn't showed up in 200 goddamn pages.
Priest was not killed.
That's bullshit.
The priest was not killed. He shows up at the end.
That's bullshit.
And the priest and what's that little boy's name? The sheep.
Catherine?
No, it was a boy.
Courtney.
It was a boy.
Yes, the one that Artie fucked, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, Courtney.
Okay, well, they ended up. It was a boy, and they got a sex change by the end when they grew up, and they're called Chelsea now. And now Chelsea and the priest are like superheroes fighting Joel and Matt.
This webcomic just...
I told you the last 74 pages.
Well, the thing is, like...
Complete turnaround.
It still seems like the comic doesn't know what the hell it wants to do.
Yep.
Like, at the very end, it seems like, alright, we finally got this good premise. Now, roll with this, stick with it.
Oh, comic's done.
Don't keep changing it. Oh, look, it's done. Well then, isn't that wonderful?
Yeah, and then it was hinted that Joel's twin sister demon thing, like, they don't die, really. Like, after they were defeated, they, like, didn't die. He doesn't use her anymore. In fact, she just, like, left and ended up, like, infecting the president. It was, like, explicitly shown that she had, like, been talking in the ear of the president, or the person who just elected president.
Well then.
And then the dolphin... Like, dolphin was also evil. Like, once you hit that state, all you want to do is just, like, talk revenge and talk evil things. So the dolphin ended up turning out to be evil as well, and Artie was trying to deal with that towards the end as well. Once he realized what she was doing, because all she was doing was talking revenge against Joel.
I was actually really disappointed when she was killed. I wanted to see a dolphin-rat hybrid.
I wanted them to actually have a happy fucking relationship, because the only happy relationship in this entire fucking comic is Joel and Matt, and they're two evil people.
Yeah.
Oh, wait, no. The Nicole ends up fucking his father. That happens too.
Joel's or Matt's?
Nicole's.
Oh.
Nicole the skunk ends up having sex with.
So hold on. Let me go over the things.
Wrap us up.
Just child molestation, incest, gender changes, cross-dressing, gay, lesbian, bisexual. I want to say pansexual in the case of Joel. Just like everyone.
I think he's just sexual.
relationships. There's... I'm struggling here. There's, like, murder, rape,
Plenty of rape scenes, yes.
plenty of rape.
Oh, the door, oh!
Oh, yeah!
Fucking forgot about that! Thank you for reminding me!
God damn it. Okay, so there's one page where Dora is being raped by Swiper, and long story short, Swiper knows swiping. Oh, man.
Yeah, the person will just like make a one-off comic that really had no justification for being in Concession, other than it wasn't supposed to be a real comic at first.
Yeah.
But,
So...
and also, the one priest character was not a child molester.
Yes. Although I kind of think that's because the author was a priest.
That was said in the description that the author had become a priest at some point.
Yeah.
Also, that's actually an interesting note, before we end this off. When I first started reading this comic, I thought that it was like, they were kind of getting started being an artist. Later on, I started putting the numbers together. They were in an art school for 2 years before they started this comic.
Huh.
And that was really strange to read. Because, like, it doesn't make much sense with the style, how it started off. I'm sure there's a comic style, like, you have to simplify things so you can draw a character again and again and again and again. And it's a huge pain in the ass. But it just seemed really strange that they were in an art school for 2 years, and they seem to have been doing well at art school, other than the fact that they had to take an extra year.
Yeah.
But it was just this weird, like, realization going through this. That,
And, like, speaking of the art style, we never really touched on that. It's very, very, very basic to begin with.
Yes. But that's not terribly uncommon to hear of. DMFA, SSDD, like, there's a lot of perfect examples of that. But by the end, they absolutely nailed down their art style and knew what they wanted to do and continue with. And they started working and developing more and making it better.
Yeah, and from what you said, it sounds like they worked on a few different comics after this, and in fact, during this.
Yep, they are on chapter 7 of The Black Dog, last time I checked. Or Order of the Black Dog. Maybe on chapter 8 by now.
I'd kind of be interested in seeing what they do with those, see if they kind of nailed down their story, nailed down their tone. It looks like they've got their art style pretty much down. They know how to differentiate species.
We can throw it in the list for future stuff. We can throw it in the random list.
Maybe.
We'll discuss
We'll touch on that later. We don't want to do too much of one artist.
Yes. We'll at least do 2 more episodes for this. Now, before we end this off, because we want these to be about 30 minutes long, roughly.
Yep. 25,
30 minutes, maybe 45 if we really go on a tangent. Before we end this off, talk a little bit about the style of this podcast, how this is going to work. So, basically, every 2 weeks, the goal here is for every 2 weeks, we want to have at least 300 pages of a comic read, or to a certain point that we both decide upon.
Yep. We will, at the end of each episode, randomly pick another comic off of our list, tell you where you can find it so you can read along if you want.
And if you guys have any suggestions for comics for us to read, let us know. Like, note either one of us on Furfinity or DeviantArt. I'm Zazar, you're Mech Attack.
Yep.
Pretty easy there. Oh yeah, I'm Zazar Draws on DeviantArt though, because someone has fucking Zazar on DeviantArt.
Aren't you Lieutenant Zazar?
No, I changed it to Zazar Draws once I got premium. Because Lieutenant Zazar was really weird.
Yeah.
But anyways, so if you have any suggestions for stuff like that in the future, make sure that they're standing on their own comics. If they're like in the first 50 pages, there's not much we can do with it.
Yeah. We kind of want something that's already a little bit established, enough that we can talk about it and talk about how it's developed a little bit.
Or just talk about how it is. In 50 pages, that's one fight scene for a really in-depth comic.
That's true.
So, that's introduction and then one fight scene.
Yeah.
So, ultimately, 150 pages minimum, really, unless, they're really big, really in-depth comics. And if you're really uncertain, just read through it yourself. Reread it and see, how long has this person been doing this? How much is here? How good is it? Just, if you think it's something that you could be sent our way, then just send it our way and we'll judge if it should be put in the freaking list or not. In the end, we're just going to throw everything into a list and hit random. And want you guys to read along as well. This is a book club, after all, or comic club. So, ultimately, what are you doing?
I'm pulling up a randomizer.
Oh, okay, fine. Ultimately, we're going to be doing this for 2 weeks, 2 weeks in between. So you all have a chance to catch up and read along with what we're doing, because some of these comics may get longer, may get more complex, or may get more weird.
And we may just talk more in depth.
Yeah, and so we want you guys to be able to catch up and keep along with what we're talking about, because this is going to be an all spoilers podcast.
Oh, yeah.
I'm not going to give a shit. Hell, I just revealed the last 74 pages. There's a lot more in that 74 pages. But ultimately, would you recommend this comic to people?
I would, with the provision that they go in with no sense of morality.
All right.
Like, if you go in thinking, you know, rape jokes are horrible, 9/11 jokes are horrible,
oh, yeah, there's
child molestation jokes are horrible, you're not going to enjoy this.
And you're a schmuck.
Well, in all honesty, they are horrible. Anyway, should we get our next comic?
Well, I was gonna say my recommendation, asshole. It's like, no, I'm like, would you recommend it? Yeah, I like, maybe if you like these things. Let's move on. Let's completely ignore what Zay has to say on the subject.
You recommended it.
Maybe I don't want to say anything. Actually, no, I only recommended it for this because I would kind of want to see your reaction of it. And that's how I would recommend this comic. It's not a great comic on its own, but it's kind of worth reading just for the sakes of, let's see how this person developed and then see this starting into their next project. Like their next big project and where they'd win from this. Because now they're kind of well established in the community.
So it's kind of a case of you want to start with this and then follow the creator less than the comic specifically.
Or just follow this with keeping in mind, like, this is how a comic develops. This is how a comic artist develops. Yeah. If for nothing else, it's a great learning experience for that. Anybody who's interested in starting comics or interested in learning how to do this, read Concession right now. Like, pull it up, start reading. It's not a terribly long comic. And it gets way off topic a lot. You could probably skip like one of every 15 pages.
I actually ended up skipping like most of the filler pages.
Yeah, so I mean, you're completely fine in doing so. So, I mean, fuck it, give it a try. You're not going to lose much. But keep in mind, it's not going to like blow you away at all.
No.
Not try blowing you.
All right. So now should we go to the next
Yes.
comic? So, let
me pull it up on my end here.
Yeah, that'll just be easier.
Right, so I have...
That actually has a list thing.
I have yeah, but we can just assign a number to it. I have 3 here. You have 2 on yours?
I have 2 on mine.
All right, so I'll be the first 3. You be 4 and 5, okay?
All right.
2. So, we have holystone-comic.com. Let me pull this up because I have my note here. I have it up here.
Okay.
So, Holystone, I don't have... Oh, artist right there is Casey Columbus, made by Casey Columbus. At holystone-comic.com. I'll have a link available where possible, just so people can read it themselves. And this comic does use a chapter format, and I actually didn't really plan ahead for where we should stop because of that, but let's just assume 300 pages because that's easier.
300 pages, and if it's like right in the middle of something, finish the chapter. All
right, sounds good to me. So, the basic premise of this comic is gods are real. Gods are absolutely real, and they are things that are growing in power if you believe in them. If like you are, if you're under the reign of a certain god, you are giving into that power. And each god has like their own little thing of them: god of life, god of death, god of hope, god of faith, things like that, and all that happens.
God of faith would have a lot more power than anything else.
But you have to be dedicated. You have to be a follower of that god for that god to gain any power.
We'll talk about this more later.
Yep. So, it's actually, a very well-made comic visually, and it doesn't change its style much. A couple of the character designs are just really awkward to see. Sometimes you'll understand when you see them. But Holystone will be the next comic to read. Thank you all for listening on the first episode.
I've been Mech.
I've been Zay.
We'll see you next time.
Bye.